I am joined now by the Times' London editor, Andy Sylvester. Hello, Andy.
Morning.
Thanks for being here. How are you?
The sun's out. That's about as positive as one can be this morning.
Although it's pretty sharp and cold. Came in on the bike. Definitely not a good idea. And as London editor, I do hold you responsible for the temperature on my cycle in this morning.
That's entirely reasonable. People keep coming up to me in the office and asking me how London is.
Yes.
Well, it's sort of reassess my job responsibilities.
It's cold. It's your fault. Turn the heating up. Look, let's crack on. A lot of news to cover. As everyone knows by now, President Trump has paused US military aid to Ukraine, piling pressure on Volodymyr Zelensky and raising huge questions for the UK and the rest of Europe. We haven't heard directly from Trump himself yet, but we have heard from the Vice President J.D. Vance talking to Fox News. He made the American position pretty clear. Here's his view of what needs to happen next.
Of course, the door is open so long as Zelensky is willing to seriously talk peace. You can't come into the Oval Office or anywhere else and refuse to even discuss the details of a peace deal. Look, this is not going to make anybody happy. The Russians are going to have to give up stuff. The Ukrainians are going to have to give up stuff. You can't come to the Oval Office and say, give us security guarantees. We won't even engage with you about what we're willing to give up. That's been the Ukrainian posture. When that posture changes, as President Trump said, when they're willing to talk peace, I think President Trump will be the first person to pick up the phone.
And after days of talk in London and in Europe about the importance of a US security guarantee for Ukraine, he was also pretty clear on what that would consist of.
If you want real security guarantees, if you want to actually ensure that Vladimir Putin does not invade Ukraine again, the very best security guarantee is to give Americans economic upside in the future of Ukraine. That is a way better security guarantee than 20,000 troops from some random country that hasn't fought a war in 30 or 40 years.
Andy, 20,000 troops from some random country that hasn't fought a war in 30 or 40 years. Aside from the insult that is to sort of, British dead in American-led wars over the last few decades, it's also just driven an absolute coach and horses through everything that Keir Starmer and other European leaders have been trying to achieve over the last week, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's almost as if that just because President Trump smiled at Keir Starmer last week and we all celebrated this great sort of diplomatic triumph, it may be that the deeply capricious duo in the White House can change from hour to hour. Yeah. We have to now just accept the fact that there is possibly now no special relationship at that level, but there are other people who will be able to opine on that more effectively than I can.
Well, I mean, it makes me wonder if they've just sort of been talking out both sides of their face, and they've been trying to reassure Russia that there's not going to be a security guarantee, while also sort of hinting to Ukraine that there is going to be a security guarantee in terms of the trade deal, and the wrong people have been listening to the wrong bits.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly that. I mean, Trump was talking about the fact that Ukraine had made a horrible misstep by saying he needed the US in. He was like, well, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that because it's a terrible mistake because Vladimir Putin has heard it. I was like, the world is not fought on social media.
Yeah, exactly.
People have intelligence assessments. Russia is fully aware of its capabilities.
They can hear you right now. Yeah, I think that's exactly it. That they can hear what they can hear. Look, let's bring in the Times' defence editor, Larisa Brown. Larisa, hello, good morning.
Hello, good morning.
Thank you for being with us. What does this mean in military terms? The US is the biggest source of military aid to Ukraine, the biggest individual source at any rate. What will this mean both in the short term for Ukraine's military and in the longer term for Ukraine's military?
Well, look, it's a massive deal, of course. At the moment, around 20% of Ukraine's military equipment is from the US. That's the equipment that's on the ground at the moment in Ukraine, according to Western officials. So that's obviously a huge chunk of the equipment. The rest of it, obviously, Ukraine have produced themselves, and they're also getting a lot of support from Europe and Britain. But what's quite crucial here is that Western officials believe like the cream of the equipment is from America. So all the most lethal equipment that Ukraine is given comes from the US. And what happened just before the inauguration was Biden's administration managed to get a lot of equipment to the Ukrainians, and it's unclear how long that can last for. Now, obviously, what the US have decided is that they're pausing the delivery of the equipment, but also they're stopping any equipment that's in depots in Poland at the moment. And it's thought that more than £1 billion of this equipment is currently not going to be sent to Ukraine. And so what that means for the battlefield, one British government source told me this morning that they believe that the Ukrainians won't be able to hold the line without that US support in the longer term. The Ukrainians are a bit more optimistic. One Ukrainian military source said to me this morning that they believe that they can hold the line because they are producing their own stuff. But in general terms, this is pretty bleak news for Ukraine.
I mean, presumably they're also quite apart from the actual weaponry. There are all kinds of logistics that are relying on American support, from sort of satellite communications and drones and all that kind of stuff. There's no suggestion as yet of that being pulled, is there?
The CNN had reported last night that there were discussions underway about US intelligence and whether that would be, whether they'd stop sharing it with Kyiv. Now, if the Americans did that, that would be absolutely massive, because a lot of Western equipment from like the Europeans relies on US intelligence. Take, for example, like Storm Shadow, which the UK have been sending. Well, that's reliant on US data for targeting. Other equipment's reliant on, as you said, intelligence that we get from satellites from the Americans. So in terms of hitting the right targets in Russia, Ukraine is reliant on US information. And so what happens next, obviously in the Ministry of Defence, probably here in the UK, they're going to be thinking, what equipment are we sending that relies on all this US information? And that's going to be the big worry here.
Yeah, my word. Look, that comment from Vance about armies from random countries, that's pretty offensive to nearly all of the US's allies, right? Us even more so.
I mean, it's incredibly offensive. I did find it quite strange a few weeks ago that the UK, however, was taking this position that we need America to offer that security guarantee. I think some people in Europe had told me that they were quite, insulted by the idea that Europe couldn't guarantee Ukraine's security on its own. However, we've got to be a bit realistic about this. The Americans do provide a lot of the equipment, and they've got all the personnel, and they can provide air cover in the form of Patriot missile defence systems, which are crucial. But Britain and France can mount a sizable force, and we're not completely weak and vulnerable. We have got a military that is well regarded around the world.
Yeah, and also we've backed America up in American wars, and it just seems to talk about not saying thank you. Look, we know what Russia wants from the peace deal. Here's Evgeny Popov, a deputy at the Russian State Duma, speaking to Times Radio Breakfast this morning.
Our message is simple. We need neutral Ukraine. No NATO in Ukraine. You should get out your military infrastructure from our borders. It's simple.
Yeah, so do we have any sense, of what Russia is being asked to give up for a deal, if anything?
Not really. I mean, there was last week sort of Trump indicated that Ukraine could get some of its land back. So obviously that would mean Russians pulling back from certain territory. But we've got such mixed messages over the last few days. It's a bit unclear what Putin would actually have to give up. And also, at the moment, it's kind of a bit unclear why Putin would come to the negotiating table, because if given this, what Trump announced overnight, the pulling out of US aid, well, that was kind of one of the America's leverages over Russia, was that they could say that we're going to start ramping up the supply of weapons to Ukraine. Whereas now it's kind of thinking like, why would Putin come to the table anyway?
To the best of your knowledge, what state is Russia's military in? Because we're talking a lot about the Ukrainian military, how much it requires, whether American help, European help, and so on. Russia's been fighting this war a long time with, I guess, some help from North Korea, veiled help from China. What do we know about their ongoing capabilities?
There's no doubt that Russia is suffering on the battlefield, and even in the last few days, the Ukrainians actually are managing to reverse some of the Russian gains. And one of a US think tank I was speaking to this morning said that the Russians are exhausted. So now would be quite a good time for the Americans and the West to ramp up their supply of weapons to Ukraine and then force Putin to the negotiating table, which is what the UK government wants to be able to do. But clearly that's not happening at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Larisa Brown, the Times Defence Editor, thanks very much indeed for being with me.